Hello, it's Silver. This is Solium Infernum. So this is a 4X strategy, technically, but the way that it's more of a small form 4X strategy makes it feel kind of more like a board game in terms of presentation than anything else. But you can think of it kind of like if Sid Meier's Civilization went to hell, more or less, is what we're going with. So the idea is that the devil, the infernal majesty of this realm, has left. They've gone somewhere, who knows where, probably fishing or something, and there are a whole bunch of archfiend pretenders to the throne. You play as one of these, and your job is to try and get to the throne and actually usurp it yourself. And of course, given that this is hell, there are some more complex, less kind ways to do this, or there are more diplomatic ways to do this. And the cool thing about this game's mechanics is it basically makes you think like an archfiend. The entire point of how the game's mechanics all work together is that you're supposed to be kind of tricky. Alliances are always temporary. Wars are temporary. Everything is very fickle. You even scheme for yourself in order to get more points and things like that. And eventually you will, of course, try to take the throne. There are several different archfiends for you to select from, and each of them do play quite differently from each other. Aside from just looking different, having sort of different themes, they also have several different mechanical benefits. Each one will have a different active skill of some kind that changes how they play. One of them may, for instance, like Mammon, have the ability to use a special active diplomacy that no one else can use that makes him skim off the top of the money that they make, basically. Or someone else may have the ability to summon up a bunch of skeletons, like Murmur. You know, just grab some cheap, fragile units that you may need for expansion and stuff like that. Just sort of plop them onto a tile somewhere and have them work for you for a while. Each archfiend also has a different stat spread. There are stats in this game called powers, and the powers are basically different playstyles. They go from 1 to 6, and you can increase them once you're actually in a match, but everyone starts with a different spread of them. And each person will also start with a couple of different pieces of equipment, like rings and amulets and stuff, that give them some altered effects. Maybe it makes their troops work differently, or it makes their money-making work differently, or something like that. Just little augments to their playstyle. And then finally, each archfiend will also have a unique sort of citadel, their home base, the one building that you have when you start a match, and each different one has different stat spreads because of the way combat works in this game, which we'll get onto later. And then you also have a legion, and the legions are what you use to actually explore the map and take new areas and things like that. And every legion has its own stat spread, as well as the fact that the legions that you start with, the ones unique to each fiend, are actually kind of immortal in a way. They can be destroyed, but they'll always come back, although it takes a number of turns equal to twice their level for them to come back. So early on in the game, if you lose them, it won't be that much of a big deal, but later on it becomes more and more painful as they get stronger. Once you have chosen your fiend, you'll appear on the map, and this is where one of the more unique aspects of the game will make itself apparent. The map is kind of infinite, but not in the sense that it procedurally generates itself or anything, in the sense that it wraps itself back around, like the edges of it are sort of like spatial anomalies. This is really bizarre to look at first, and when I first noticed it, I actually messed up the tutorial because I didn't fully understand it. But yeah, the map does wrap itself around infinitely, so if you continually move it to the right, eventually you'll end up to the left of where you just were. It'll just keep wrapping itself around, and they've done a really impressive job of making this wraparound effect seamless, so that the map has no borders. At no point do you ever feel like you reach an edge, it just continues to repeat. This is something that's necessary for you to consider when planning your strategy, because of course navigating this map is a little bit weird, and you can often get to any given area in multiple different ways, since if one way is blocked off, usually you can go around a different way and wrap around somehow to end up there anyway. The name of the game here is Prestige. Prestige are the points that you earn, basically like victory points, for doing most things, and the traditional win condition is to have the most prestige by the end of the match. And a normal length match will go on for 50 turns, after which point the council will convene and start to choose a winner, and usually around 5 to 10 turns after that, the convening will be done, and they'll pick the person who, at the end, has the most prestige. Tiles in this game, or hexes as they actually are, they are called cantons, and whenever you first start a match, you'll only have the ones surrounding your home base, and everything else will be neutral. And you simply take them by moving any of your owned legions across them. As long as you're the first one to move across that particular canton, it'll switch to your color and you'll take it. By default, you actually cannot venture onto any other player's cantons. So if it's owned by someone else, you can treat it sort of like a wall. You cannot walk there normally. There are ways to change that, but under normal conditions, you can't. So this allows you to start kind of walling other people off early game if you want to, by strategically placing your legions around the area and moving them in shapes that sort of paint the landscape of your color, getting a nice large area for yourself to roam around in. And you will also get some bonus prestige every turn depending on the number of cantons total that you take, so you do want a large empire if possible. But where a lot of the conflict is going to be focused around are the very important places of power. These are neutral places with cool names and models that you'll see along the place, and you have to take these with military might. There is no other way. You have to have a legion actually go and battle them and reduce their HP to 0. As soon as you destroy them, basically, then you will take that place of power and it'll start healing itself back up, and it'll be under your control. Places of power will generate prestige for you as long as you have them. And so we've got to talk about how combat works for a second, because it's a little bit unusual. I actually kind of like it because it's a little bit more involved, a little bit different than a usual 4X combat system, which is often quite simple. Combat in this game is resolved in 3 different phases: a ranged phase, a melee phase, and an infernal phase, which is basically magic. And they're always in that order unless one of the units has some sort of special passive skill that changes the order. So every legion in the game, every building, every neutral unit, everything has those 3 stats: a ranged number, a melee, and then an infernal. And the way that it works is when you clash with something, those numbers are basically subtracted from each other, and the difference is dealt to the loser as damage. So if one has 9 ranged and one has 7 ranged, then the one that has 7 ranged will take 2 damage. And then the battle will simply continue down the line until it resolves the infernal damage if the enemies survive that long. And then after that, whatever health is left over will be the same pretty much the next turn, and you can continue to do this until you actually take an area or destroy a legion or whatever it is you're trying to do. These numbers are very important, so they can be augmented in various different ways to make your legions more capable of taking higher level areas. Whenever you defeat a certain number of targets with a legion, it's not about experience, it's about like the number of battles they've been in, and they will eventually get promoted. And once you promote them, you'll get a choice between 3 different stat increases that you can choose to make them more powerful. They also have slots on them depending on their level, and you can fill these slots with different effects to make them stronger. So you can get these things called praetors, which are basically like lords, more or less, and they have a stat increase, and as long as you apply them to a legion, then they will apply that stat increase to it, making them stronger. They also sometimes have some passive effects that they will apply to the legion as long as they're part of it. You can also get artifacts of various kinds. Some artifacts are used simply by having them, but there are also artifacts of war which have to be given to a legion and will apply various effects while they're there. And you can also use these temporary effects called stratagems that will give a legion more power or weaken an enemy or something like that, but they take up these slots and they're only used for one battle. As soon as the battle is over, then the stratagems go away. So you basically pay for like a temporary enchantment. But while you're doing all this, you'll have to contend with one of the game's other really unique mechanics, and that's the order system. Basically, in most 4X games, you have the production queues of all of your cities, and then you have the queues of all of your units, and you sort of juggle maybe a dozen or 2 things every turn, depending on how much stuff you've got as a part of your empire. In this game, it does not work that way. Instead, you have a lot of possibilities of things that you could be doing every turn, but you only have a very small number of order slots, and doing something takes an order slot. Making a legion march across the map, that's one order. Attaching a praetor to a legion, that's an order. Casting a spell is an order. Scheming to yourself is an order. And by default, you only have 2 order slots, so you have a lot of options, a lot of possibilities of things you could do every turn, but you can only choose 2 of them to do every turn. And they also resolve in order, which can be important because the turn order actually changes every turn. One person will be the regent, one player will be, and they'll go first, and then the order will go sort of clockwise from them. And the regent will also travel clockwise every turn, so someone gets to be the first turn every turn and it changes. So you do need to make sure that your orders are queued up in the right order to actually work correctly, and if something doesn't work, then that order will simply be cancelled and you'll waste that part of your turn. Like if you have a troop that you want to march across the map and they're marching into a territory that gets taken by an enemy before you get there, then it'll just cancel that turn entirely. Now, because you are a bunch of demons, diplomacy is very important and also usually very unpleasant. Everything you can do in this game is temporary. There are no permanent like armistice or anything like that. Everything only lasts for a certain number of turns, and even war lasts a certain number of turns. So the way that it works is you can choose to demand something from one of the other players. And if you do this, they can respond. They can give you what you demand, or they can reject your demand, at which point you can choose a vendetta against them. And a vendetta will be a temporary thing you can do that will give you some extra prestige if you do it in the right number of turns. You can choose exactly what it is and how many turns you have to complete it, but the harder it is, the better the reward is. And only when you have a vendetta with someone can you actually march onto their territory and attack their legions and stuff. You've got to have a vendetta with someone before you can do this. It's sort of like a temporary declaration of war. However, whenever you have a vendetta against someone, they can also do it to you. So when you have a vendetta against a player, they can march on your territory and attack your legions as well, and even try to take your places of power. So you've got to be careful. However, as soon as the vendetta ends, by either taking over the number of turns you said it should take, or by you completing the vendetta and doing the thing you said you were going to do, then the hostilities immediately end, and everything goes back to the way it was. There are a bunch of other diplomatic actions that you can get as you go. Some of them require you to have certain powers at certain levels, and others are just options that you'll get, like the ability to demand stuff like artifacts instead of money, or the ability to simply insult them and see what they say back to you. You can even give a gift to them and suggest a temporary armistice, but do remember that these sorts of alliances are always temporary in Hell, so you can still be enemies like 5 turns later. The currency and resource system is really interesting in this game. It's called tribute. There are 4 different kinds of tribute that are aligned with different powers and things. There's souls, Ichor or Icor, I've never known how you pronounce that word, Hellfire, and Darkness. And the way that you get it is that you have to actually seek tribute. You have to choose one of your orders or even multiple of your orders in a turn towards seeking tribute. And then the next turn, you'll be given a selection of coins, and you can select a certain number of coins to keep. So the resources in this game are actual physical tokens that you have to keep in an inventory. And you can only carry a certain number of them total, and you can also only pay with things with up to 8 at once. So you can choose to spend a turn to consolidate these tokens and turn them into a 5th type, which is a golden token that contains multiple different types together. This becomes necessary later on if you're trying to buy more expensive stuff, since you only have 8 slots to pay with. If something costs like 15 or 20 of one resource, you're not going to be able to fit that many coins in there, so you're going to have to consolidate some of the ones you have so that you have better value, but in a smaller number of slots. There is a bazaar in the game, which is the primary place you're going to be spending these resources, and the bazaar is where you get stuff like those praetors and artifacts that I mentioned, as well as other stuff like manuscripts, which come in fragments, and once you obtain all the fragments for a certain manuscript, it gives you the power to do something new, basically. There's even a back room in the bazaar that you can get access to in certain ways that has some really rare and expensive stuff in it. You can also spend your resources on increasing your own powers. So if you want to have extra wrath or extra deceit to get some better spells or to resist spells and things like that, this is how you increase all those stats. You spend increasing amounts of these resources and some order slots to make them stronger. Depending on the levels of your powers, you'll get various rituals that look like cards that you can enact, and you only have 1 slot at first to spend to actually use a ritual. Some rituals, they simply have a cost that you pay as soon as you cast it, and it does something next turn. Some of them instead have an upkeep, and you have to keep paying on them every turn to keep them active. There are also some particularly powerful and dangerous and rare legions that you can get that have an upkeep you have to pay, so they become very expensive the longer you keep them, but they are super strong. There's also the schemes, which I really like. Yeah, at any point you can choose to scheme on your turn and to take an order slot to just think of being diabolical. And the next turn you'll get a choice between 2 different schemes that you thought of. And if you want, you can choose one of these to actually do. This is how you get large amounts of prestige all at once. These are worth like large lumps of prestige, but you have to actually complete the scheme. Whenever you choose a scheme, you can choose to either do it publicly, at which point everyone will know you're doing it, but it'll be worth more. So basically it's worth more because everyone knows you're working towards towards it and can potentially try to stop you. But you can also choose to not announce it and keep it private, which is worth less, but no one else knows you're doing it, and it also means that the amount of prestige that you get for it does not get added to your prestige counter directly, and instead is only added to your count at the end of the game when it's being counted up for votes. You can also choose to spend this prestige if you want to on increasing your rank. So you can become like a Duke of Hell or a Duchess or a Prince at the very top and things like that. So you would do this because even though it takes the resource that you need to win, it also makes you stronger in various ways. Higher ranks will allow you more votes. So if you vote on various different things, which there are points where you've got to vote on movements and stuff, your votes are worth more if you have a higher rank. Also, every time you seek tribute to get some resources, some money to spend, if you're a higher rank, you'll get higher quality coins that are worth more, and you'll also be able to keep more tokens at a time. So at first you may only be able to choose out of 3, but eventually you may be able to keep 5 or more depending on your rank. So it allows you to raise more resources more quickly. But it's always a strategic choice whether or not you want to increase your rank and win, because your rank does not matter at all when it comes to counting votes to see who wins. Only your prestige matters. But of course it wouldn't be a 4x strategy if it didn't also have other win conditions, and you can do things like actually have a military might sort of a coup win condition where you actually take the capital city of Pandemonium, which has very high stats, so you'll need some really powerful units to do this. But if you do it, you can take it, basically kill the council, and declare yourself the winner instead. Although when you do this, you do get excommunicated, which allows everyone else to permanently attack you as if they had vendettas against you, and you have to survive several turns of this in order to actually get this kind of victory. And there are several other kinds of victory to seek out as well, depending on what sort of map you're on and stuff. I would say that this game is a really unique 4X because it does things at a bit of a different scale with a really cool sort of wraparound map gimmick and some really good theming. The overall appearance and theming of this game is one of its strongest points. The art for the cards and for the events and stuff like that, they look really good, and the actual in-game models and stuff have this really nice sort of shaded detail to them that looks sort of infernal in a lot of ways, but in a way that is kind of colorful and pleasant to look at, and even the actual archfiends that you can select from themselves have some really cool detail to their models and stuff. This is a really compelling 4X in my opinion that takes the formula and doesn't simplify it, but makes it a little bit more bite-sized. So it's rare to see a 4X that is made smaller in scale but isn't oversimplified at the same time. This is still a complex 4X with a lot of posturing and a lot of diplomatic stuff themed around the idea of being in hell, and themed very well in my opinion, but it's just smaller. And I think if you've had trouble with games like Civilization in the past because you find that the amount of plates you have to keep spinning every turn is overwhelming, this would be a really good game to try because it still has all that strategy, all that posturing, but it's done in a smaller scale that makes it more manageable, more bite-sized, and I think that's very cool. And of course, as well as having some really fun single-player content, this game does have a lot of multiplayer longevity to it, I think, because of the hell theme and the sort of conniving nature of being a fiend and how good the game is at making you feel like you're an archfiend with all the tricky things you can do and all the plotting and scheming and everything. I think there's a lot of possibility here for some really fun multiplayer shenanigans. If I were to make a request for the game, I'd like to see some more units added, some more legions, as well as more spells, just a little bit more variety in the things that you can buy and save up for, and I would really like to see more maps, because currently there are only 3 maps in the game, and they do have that unique gimmick to them, which helps, but 3 is a pretty small number. I would definitely like to see some more variety when it comes to maps in general. But aside from that, this is a very solid game, and it's a really compelling entry into a genre that I'm not always extremely good at, but always enjoy from a casual perspective, so seeing one that is this different and this well-themed is super cool. I will put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page for Solium Infernum if you guys wish to check it out yourselves. Recommended for sure. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.